The first time I met Sean, which was a couple of years ago, he was wearing a t-shirt that said, "Education is life." So it's a serious privilege to have him with us today. Sean has built a career as a coach to the best, quite literally. He's Canadian by birth and a student of Tennessee State University. Sean was actually a varsity golf player, means he played for his university, before heading into coaching. Based from Florida since 2006, Sean has coached a host of world-class golfers, including the likes of Lee Westwood and Danny Willett from Britain, Hunter Mahan, Justin Rose, who we had on the show recently, and of course, the one, the only Tiger Woods. Thank you so much, Sean, for joining us today. Can you hear us and see us?
How's that?
That's fantastic.
Perfect.
Okay, perfect.
That's brilliant. Did you hear our introduction?
Yeah, you know, I never really listened to when people introduce me.
Okay.
The thing is like, no matter who you are, there has to be something about you where there's enough humility that when people talk nicely about you, you kind of think they're lying to an extent. It's like it's an interesting insecurity that I think is necessary to absolve oneself from arrogance, which is pretty much a fatal mistake, right? So it's one of my friends, Kevin Chappell, who plays on the PGA Tour. He was just honored by being put in the UCLA Sports Hall of Fame. And he called me before he did it and said he didn't know how he was going to do it because he's terrible at being honored. And I just thought that was really interesting. You know, it's a fascinating thing. So I'm lucky enough in my career to, you know, work with a lot of great players, and timing. You know, people talk about success like it's, you know, there's the book like the 7 Steps to Success and whatever these books are about. I don't really think there's 7 steps. I think there's a lot of luck. I think there's a lot of failure. I think there's a lot of opportune moments that occur in a whim. If you miss it by 3 days, you never have it. So I think that's why no matter what you've accomplished, there has to be some humility in all of it because, you know, I'm here because of many moments.
When Henry met you, Sean, he said that you were wearing a shirt that said "Education is life," which is a great t-shirt. What was your education like growing up? For context, the average age of listeners is about 12. So
right.
Going back a few years, what were you like as a 12-year-old? Did you know this was the kind of industry you were going to work in?
No, well, my son, I have 2 sons. Quinn is 12 and Kieran is 8. So I know all about those 12-year-olds right now. Okay. So my advice to all the 12-year-olds out there is your mom is not your enemy. She's really trying to help you, and just respect your mother. Yeah, I mean, I liked golf at that point. Everything that I like now, I liked then. You know, golf, jazz and hip hop music, and basically reading. So I've kind of done the same 3 things every day for my whole life, really, since I was almost 12 years old. And, you know, it's difficult for kids. I mean, look, like, my son, who's 12, is so disappointed in adults right now. He just can't get over it. I mean, he turns the TV on and he's like, "Dad, are you kidding me? Like, these people are elected by who? By you." And so he's struggling a little bit with you know, the world is not easy. Like, growing up is difficult. And I think when we try to over positivize things, we affect the learning. And, you know, life is a steep mountain, and well, life is a high mountain, but mountain is full of like plains and steeps and plains and steeps. And I think we just got to prepare kids to be able to understand that it's going to be difficult, and that's okay. And it's not about trying to make it easier all the time. Shoot, all my heroes, they lived a lot of struggle, and that's where the wisdom came from. So, I mean, I haven't learned anything on vacation in a decade, but I've learned a lot through my most difficult days. And it's almost like society is saying you shouldn't have a difficult day because you should be so grateful for your life. And so, but I just struggle with that a little bit. I think it puts kids in a pigeonhole where they can't be real. And being real is, you know, unfortunately, in the Western world, well, most of the world, young boys and guys like us are led to believe that men shouldn't cry and that weakness is weakness. And we just avoid and cope with all the nonsense we go through. And it just, the longer we repress it, it turns into vehement and, energy. And I think when my son turns the TV on, he looks at a lot of adults who have been coping and avoiding dealing with the things they should have dealt with. So now I'm a big believer that the world is inside out, meaning that it's not outside in. So material things cannot make me happy. They may for 2 weeks, but it won't be extended. It's inside out. So how can I be in traffic one day and be really frustrated from the traffic, and then the next day I'm in traffic and I feel grateful that I have like 40 minutes just to listen to music? So when people like, traffic stresses me out, or my mom stresses me out, or the government stresses me out, my question to them is that all the time? And the answer is normally no. And so it's just getting people to understand that, you are Steven Spielberg, right? You're Guy Ritchie. You're producing movies constantly. And from a good mood, the movie looks a certain way. From a bad mood, the movie looks a certain way. And I think if we just could teach this to kids at a young enough age in school, if you look at it, if we're really interested, as you guys are, in educating and helping young kids, as we were, I think starting in first grade, they all learn how to meditate. Because if they don't learn how to meditate, at some point they may medicate. And, that's to each his own. I like to have beers as much as anybody, but I'm just saying that if I have to choose one or the other, I know which one's going to go. Nutrition, like all these essential things that are necessary so as you see in America, real systemic difference between the rich and the poor. And so when you look at how children's brains evolve and how the brain neurologically adapts and grows, so much of it is based on proper nutrition. And, there's a lot going on in the world right now. And I want the kids listening to this to understand that if it upsets you, that's fine. It upsets me.
Can I ask Sean, before we've got some golf questions for you that I know we've got some golf nuts out there who are dying to hear. But before we move on, obviously you realize that mentoring is a big thing for us. I'd love to know as concisely as you can, because it's a horrible question, but what does mentoring mean to you?
I think mentoring to us in a way, in a sneaky kind of, in a sneaky kind of around the way Steven Gerrard kind of goal that happened from nowhere. Mm-hmm. I think we're all giving people the advice we need to hear the most. So I think mentoring is our own form in a selfish way of therapy as well. And because we have to be the example. I think everything comes back to self. Even selflessness comes back to self. And I think selfish is like it's got too much of a negative overtone as a word. I mean, we are a species who are here to survive. But for mentoring for me is one, paying forward all the mentorship I've had. And mentoring didn't have to be like in person. I was mentored by books. I feel like I was mentored by Malcolm X and Nelson Mandela. I feel like I was mentored by a lot of music artists. I feel like I was mentored by the message of Jesus and the Buddha. So mentorship's everywhere. But I honestly think, like, for me, teaching and coaching, and as you listen to me now, you realize that my lessons are not just full of technique. I just feel like it helps you sharpen your sword, and you have to be an example. You can't talk to kids about nutrition and show up and be 40 pounds overweight. They look like the kids have these, these kind of, I can't use that word, but they have these receptors for, like, when you're saying something and then they watch you and go, man, he doesn't do what he says. I've just lost respect. Yeah,
sure. What we say is, like, parents often say, don't use your Instagram or Facebook. And then the kid sees them on their Outlook at dinner. And you're like, well, that's your Instagram. You've spoken a lot about, well, for some context, we think that the best way for kids to develop is to get a sense of ownership with their education. They make the rules. They're the ones leading the conversation. You've spoken a lot about the power of intention. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? What you mean by the power of intention?
Well, I think we have a natural intention. All right. So I think we're all born with the natural intention to love. I really feel that's natural. That's our natural state. It feels right. When you see it, you get goosebumps. When you see hatred, you don't get goosebumps. When you see hatred, it feels awful. So I think that the way we feel as people is connected to what we think about. And so kind of we're born with this understanding, I believe, and there's no way to scientifically prove it, but there's not really any way to scientifically prove any belief, really. I just feel the default mechanism that we have is the clarity. So having an intention in your career, whatever my intention is, then my attention is probably going to have to equal it. So if my intent as a golf teacher is to make a lot of money, then my attention would be on the ways to do that. If my intention is to be remembered one day as someone who really helped a lot of young men and women find themselves, or just point them in direction of who they already are, and was able to influence the world with the message of love, then my attention has to be on that. So to me, whatever you, and wanting to make a lot of money that's a fine intent too. I mean, I'm sure most people, when we start out, it's kind of that. And we get to the point where we exceed that point and go, okay, nirvana does not come from another 20,000 pounds or 10,000 pounds or a new car. And so hopefully everyone can get to that point. But yeah, just, it's the intention, right? So if I'm with my family, my intent is obviously to be a father. So my attention has to be on turning my phone off, and being there and being present. And it's not always easy because, you know, we all have big brains and there's a lot of stuff going on, and we read articles, you know, for 4 hours, and we sit down and think we can be present. It's really a great challenge. But, you know, if your intent is to go out with your mates and you guys are going to go to the pub, then your attention has to be on calling a cab because you're not driving and drinking. So it's kind of a simple way of looking at it. So if my intent is to go to work, then my attention is on my work. My intention is to sit on the beach, then my attention is on having sunscreen, water, and some Coronas.
It's a bit like Walter should have had his attention on that 2-foot putt he had to halve the hole with me the other day, but he didn't. You know, it's important. I know I'm getting questions in here relevant to PGA and all sorts. It's going to be, we've had over 141 comments and questions already. So there are two big relationships we've got to dwell on, right? Like you work with Tiger and you've had this incredible 10 years working with Justin, bringing him to the peak of the world game. Why don't we start with Tiger? What is it that makes him the best?
I mean, almost everything. You know, I started with Tiger a year after his life fell apart and he was going through a divorce and all that. So I felt like my experience was very different than any coach that preceded me. When you go from invincible to visible, that would feel like the universe falling down on you. When you go from knowing what everyone thinks about you to then questioning, I wonder what they think now. Imagine when you knew, if you were a professional or you were anything, and you walked in to a tournament and you knew that me and Justin knew that you knew that we knew you were going to beat us, and you already knew that. You know what I mean? I mean, he literally had this aura. It was like the biggest lion on the grasslands of South Africa. I mean, he just walked, and it was almost like the air was gone from around you. But remember, that would just be your perception of the man. That's not actually what happened in the physics of the universe, right? It's all perception. So when people are like, man, he like walked on water, that's perception. It's not really happening.
Would you say your impact was more technical or mental in those years you worked with him? Or is it hard to?
Yeah, no, I think I think I've obviously moved on from that time. Like, I think back then I was more arrogant than I am now. I think I don't like to think about if you could do things over because it's kind of ridiculous to think that way. Where if you think about the things you regret or the things you could have done better, where does that lead you in the present moment? It's just not really a helpful way to feel, you know. There's nothing you could do. But yeah, I would say that, look, it was like easily the most difficult time of his career. And I was there for him 100%. And we know that. And we have a lot of love for each other because of that. And I mean, Tiger's the greatest player of all time. I think we're all kind of fooling ourselves if we think we're teaching him anything he doesn't know already. But, you know, Yeah, yeah. I mean, hopefully, I mean, the way I see it sometimes is I'm kind of just like a Sherpa on Mount Everest. So I'm not going to climb the mountain for you, but I'll make sure that the ladder is over that crevasse. But you still have to look down 2,000 feet as you're stepping on a ladder that's horizontal. I mean, it's still on you, right?
And what about Justin? I mean, in short, you've just done this incredible decade with Justin, and his career has gone, you know, from up to the skies. Why did it work so well?
You know, I think there's, you know, Rosie's like a brother to me. So, and will always be. The one thing I probably will be the most proud about at the end of my career, that everyone who I stopped working with, whether it was my decision, mutual, or their decision, I still talk to them all the time. We don't have to be like that. Like, it doesn't have to be that personal. I mean, you got to be able to separate the business from the personal aspects. Do you need to be friends with people to do business well? You don't. A lot of people say, don't do business with friends. I don't agree with that either. You know, it's going to be, who knows, right? I mean, all these sayings that guide us in life, like we hear when we're 10 and we go, oh, so that's just cemented truth, right? So I'm never going to do business with one of my friends. You don't start out in golf. Danny Willett is another English player that I work with. I started with Danny when he really lost his game. And, you know, he went from 7th in the world to 450th. So I know when I start with someone like that, technically I'm always at least 15, 16 years older than them. I think back to myself at that time. So most of the times I'm pretty impressed with where they're at in their understanding. But it's just all the little things. It's like getting people to understand, like when you're annoyed with someone or when you're annoyed with something, you're just annoyed with your own thinking of it. It seems like it's them, but it's never them. It's not, because it, like I said, it doesn't come from outside of you. So with Rosie, the first time I had a lesson with him, I told him he was the #1 player in the world. And he was like 80th. He's like, well, look, I don't need to hear all that. I don't need a cheerleader. I said, no, you're the #1 player in the world. You just don't know how to be that. And hopefully together we can do that. So there's no real plan. I mean, the plan is to have an understanding of biomechanics and how human beings move and generate energy. And then the physics of having this metal object that's connected to you that has some physics to it. And then the geometry of why the ball does what it does. So you have that, you know that, but each day you got to have a sensitive mind and you got to be able to adapt and you got to be able to move with the current. I mean, the one thing that I know is I think sometimes in education, there's too much of a plan. So it's like, we need to have, like, parents will say to me, I want my son to play professional golf. Okay, fine. Does he want to play professional golf? And it's funny how often the kids are looking at you going, yes, but everything about them is saying no. But say the kid says he wants to. The parent said, I want a plan of exactly what we need to do to get there. And I'm like, well, Pele didn't have a plan. He just had a real love for soccer, and he was super poor, and it was his only way out of the ghetto. I'm not so sure that many of the greats had plans. Like Steven Gerrard, again, I watched his documentary. Didn't know much about him before that. I mean, legend. But that's a guy who got to the highest level who probably shouldn't have. He just loved the game so much. He loved his team so much. And he loved his city so much that the level of inspiration that he had, he couldn't fail, really. I mean, failure's fine, but he was going to be a legend. So with Rosie is the same way. I mean, Rosie, before he really had any coach except for his father, almost won the British Open at 17 years old. So now, if I took a 10-year-old kid who'd never played golf and taught him how to play golf, and then he went on to have that career, I'd probably take a lot more credit for it. But, you know, I'm, like I said, I'm just putting the ladder down. You gotta move over it. And the one thing about Justin and I, it's probably the most mutually beneficial relationship I've ever had in business, and as a friendship, is because he's just never satisfied with what he's doing. And it can create like a touch of misery, but that's why these guys become the best, because they're just not satisfied with where they're at. And so it's like a really tight rope. It's a tight rope. It's like you're literally teetering from side to side. And if you go either way, it's probably going to be tough to be #1 unless you're physically just immense, you know, unless you're just, that's very rare. I mean, especially at a world-class level, you're not going to run into too many people who are physically that much more impressive. I'd say with Tiger, it happened. He was the first real athlete besides Jack Nicklaus to play the game. So when I think of the best 2 athletes to play the game, they have the most wins. So you're an athlete, everything becomes easier when it comes to movement. So I would say, you know, with Rosie, we just kept going and we kind of looked under rocks, and we did a good job of looking under rocks, but not looking for too long. And one of my sayings in coaching is like, let's not find new solutions to old problems, because, you know, when you get insecure and the player's insecure and you're insecure and you just want to go home and feel good about what you did that day, as a sense of kind of resolve, we're not practicing to feel better. We're practicing to get better. And in my life, when I think about the times where I really got better, either spiritually or physically, it wasn't a lot of fun. It wasn't really a lot of fun. So,
Sean, can I ask, why it's so cool having you on the show and for kids to listen to you is that there's so many similarities between golf and exams, or golf and learning, you know?
Sure.
And the fake self-image the golfers have of themselves when they're not performing is the same fake self-image the kids have when they're at a maths test and they think I'm bad at maths. The lack of mental clarity when you're over the tee is the same as when you're whatever.
Everything.
Do you agree? Is there other things which I've missed there? I feel like so much crossover, isn't there?
No, but once again, it's like, you know, I have two sons are very different. I have one who cares if you're impressed, and he's going to do anything to make you feel proud of him. And the other one could care less. He knows he's going to be fine. I know he is. I feel like I could send him somewhere and he could raise himself. With him, I find that the action is more important. But, you know, when you watch kids who play really well, they get to a tournament and then they play terrible, and then their parents think it's mental and they need to get a sports psychologist. I totally don't agree with that. I think that success and failure leave clues. And if you can be retrospective and introspective, man, it's its own guide. It's like, it's its own guide. So I feel the problem is one, like you ask a group of 15-year-old kids, what makes you successful? I mean, how many are going to put their hand up and say money? So that's the first part. So that's taught. That's completely taught, because there's not a 2 or 3-year-old in the world, and they seem to me to be the most like the Dalai Lama, just loving life, right? Waving at people, just having a great time, crawling in the dirt. Being grounded in the earth is really important. We tell them to get off the ground because they're getting dirty, but the fact of the matter is, one, from a biological system, that dirt is important for their immune system, and two, being grounded with this massive energy ball of electrons called the earth is pretty important too. So it's like, you know, we want them to be kids, but we won't let them be kids. So I think when it comes to exams and golf tournaments, people don't rise to their expectation level. They fall or they fail to their level of training. And so when I'm watching golfers who say they can't take it from practice to the course, if you really look at their practice, it's pretty vain and fairly egotistical. They're not really working on the things they're not good at. Who wants to do that? And they're just in a self-protection mode. So, way I like to look at it is, if you look at like the SAS or the Navy SEALs or even the SBS, the Special Forces groups, basically they take a bunch of capable, competent soldiers, and then they make a week that's so difficult that the only ones who are left at the end are called Special Forces. So, do you know what I mean? So it's
absolutely,
they get to greatness by just sheer pain and suffering, and then say, okay, these guys, look, they all have high IQs. They're all fit. You don't get into that program if you're already not that. So what's really interesting is, the admiral's son, he doesn't make it through 3 days, and he was like a guarantee to get in. 6'2", 200 pounds, played wide receiver, 4.0 GPA, Mensa smart. But the kid from, Lee, Manchester, makes it because he's sitting in that water and it's freezing and everyone feels like they're going to die of hypothermia. And he says, well, you know what? This isn't as bad as my walk to school every day when I was in Lee growing up, getting beat up every day. So that's the thing about, as parents out there, just trying to protect kids from too much. And so they never create any kind of skin to the difficulty that life is going to show them. We just overprotect them.
It's exactly what you said at the beginning. It's that not sugarcoating stuff for kids because they're kids, isn't it?
Sure. No, you guys know better than me. I work with obviously spent so much time with children. But but it's a little bit different. Like most kids who come to the golf course, it's like a kid-friendly place. Like it's beautiful outside. They get to smash balls. With education and tutoring, some kids just, you're there to inspire them to love it because they don't technically love it. So I'd say that that's probably more difficult. If a kid came to me and he didn't want to play golf, I'd tell his parents, I'm not going to coach him. I don't want to be part of that. But that's man, they're so much smarter than we think they are because they're so monosyllabic. So it's like, hey, how was your day? Good. What's new? Nothing. So what are you thinking about? Nothing. How's your brother? Fine. And then you get him in the right moment. And he says, Dad, you know what? I can't believe Donald Trump acts like that. I can't believe how we've handled the coronavirus. I'm worried about my grandmother and my grandfather because I want them to see me grow up. And you're like, oh, you do think about other things than fine, good, and yes. So they're keeping that in, and that I think keeping anything in is dangerous. We have systems. When we need to clear our bladder, we urinate. When we need to get rid of our feces, we poo. We got to get rid of the toxins inside of us, and that's why we need to speak to each other.
Sean, you've been incredibly generous with your time, and I feel like you're one of those guys we could just keep on the line for a couple of hours. You'd be happy.
you guys too. I mean,
we love to.
We
have
a lot of respect for what you guys are doing.
You're very kind. What we're going to do before we finish is we're going to test something I think is going to be one of your weaknesses, which is giving.
I got plenty.
Which is going to be giving a really short answer. So it's a quick fire round. You can't elaborate. You can't elaborate on anything we ask you now. We're going to rattle through like 8 or 10 really short questions, and you got to pick something.
Which we've taken from the audience.
Yeah. So when I was growing up, everyone always told me to dumb it down. I said, that's why everyone's so dumb.
Well, so to kick off, I've got one for you, which is favorite golf course.
St. Andrews.
You've spoken about Gerrard, but I want to know your favorite sports person outside of golf.
Muhammad Ali.
Most promising tour player in golf.
Cameron Champ, my guy. And he hits it 400 yards straight. So
that's my next question, which is stop the pros from overpowering the courses with technology? Yes or no?
No, don't get in the way of the evolution of things. I mean, if you look at it in a quick way, the stroke average in 1970 was 70.1, and last year it was 70.1. So golf is hard.
Okay. Sean, your proudest career moment?
Probably when Michael Gligic made it to the PGA Tour. So I started coaching Mike when he was 12 years old, and after 17 years, at the age of 29, after 8 years of pain and suffering on mini tours, living out of his car, he's now a PGA Tour member.
Amazing.
And if there's one trait that you think is important for kids to demonstrate or to learn, what is that one trait? Oh, it's tough.
We've got him. It's tough. He's finally speechless.
Well, no, the mind is working. It's like a hamster wheel. This thing's like a hamster wheel that's really efficient. Just kindness.
Great one.
Yeah.
Very good.
Just kindness. I met a lot of people who are kind, and they have been very successful, and they have an abundant life. And I've met people who are really kind, and they just work on behalf of the poor, and they have a very abundant life. So I think if you have kindness, one, that means you have self-love, which is important. You cannot transfer onto others which you don't understand yourself. Kindness, for sure.
What a great note to finish on. Before we do, did you get my message about a cookie?
I don't have any cookies. I got a Triscuit.
Yeah, that's going to be perfect. So it's a very simple game. It's cookie face for you on that side of the Atlantic, or for us, it's biscuit face. You got to place it on the forehead. You're going to need to take your glasses off probably. And essentially, we're going to give you 30 seconds to try and get it from your forehead to your mouth without using your hands. So
how long?
What?
30 seconds.
30 seconds. We're going to do it too.
What I'd like you to do is also coach me through it as I'm doing it.
Yeah, give us some talking, give us some coaching for how to, my advice to you as a coach is don't go too quick at the top. We've got 30 seconds, lead us away.
And if it falls off, I can put it back on?
Yeah, you get another go. And remember, Sean, there are about hundreds of kids out there playing the game in front of you. There's chocolate with my forehead.
Has anyone ever done this?
Yeah, for sure. We had Justin who did it.
All right, I got a different theory.
I think Justin's better at biscuit face than you.
Oh no!
I'm trying to throw it in the air and then catch it.
Yeah, no one's tried that yet. The guy who won had a beard.
It's 30 seconds. You've got a tanned, very handsome face, but it's not a biscuit face.
My Triscuit broke.
We can have a look right now, and I'll just show you, because you're the end of our series. We're about to have a summer break. We got on here.
Right on.
Andrei Shevchenko didn't do it. Tim Henman, Gianfranco Zola.
I love
didn't do it.
Hey, you guys want to hear like a really quick funny story about Shevchenko?
I'd love to.
Okay, so growing up, my dad made me play soccer, football. It wasn't the love of my life, but he's from Glasgow, and he grew up in 1940 in Glasgow. The first 12 years of his life, he had like abject asthma, really bad asthma. So he couldn't even play football. So I guess from where he's from, in that neighborhood, not being able to play football would have been like a death sentence. So as he got older, his asthma went away. So in his early 20s, he became a referee. And then he coached my football teams. And we had very good competitive football teams. I mean, if we played you guys, it would probably been over. But at that time, California, a very good football team. So my dad ended up retiring as the head referee in Canadian Soccer Association. So every single weekend, it was the Premier League all the time. So just over time, I wasn't into it. So I don't know much about it. So I went to England to see Justin Rose before the British Open. And that day he was at Wimbledon. And so I got there. We had like a miscommunication. I got there to Queenwood and went in, and the guys met me, and the place is like, it's like palatial. It's crazy. It's a really nice place. And went in, met the pros, all that, and they took first class care of me, and I had a great time just sitting in the men's locker room talking to the guys behind the bar and the counter. So I went to the bathroom, came back, and there's this man sitting there, and he knows who I am. And he says, "Hey, how are you?" And I said, "Oh, good. How are you?" And I can tell he's like Ukrainian. And so I sit down with him. I have a pint. He said, "You want to go play golf?" And I said, "Yeah, sure. Why not? I don't have anything to do today." So we go out, hit some balls, and then we take Tom Lewis and his coach on for 9 holes for a little bit of money. And I have not played like, oh my gosh, in 3 months. So we go out there and whack it around, some moments of brilliance and some not so brilliant moments. And basically, I have no idea who this is. He's talking he's talking a lot about, politics and the Ukraine. And so I'm thinking, all right, well, he's, along that line. And then I forget what the moment was, but I asked someone, and the guy looked at me like I was the dumbest person ever. And I said, Aunt Shevchenko here, he's a politician. He's kind of, yeah, but he was like the best football player in the world. So I ran up to the room and YouTubed Shevchenko. Yeah. And I'm seeing these left-footed goals from all over the field. So I had no idea. And I think he really enjoyed the fact that I had no idea. So then we went downstairs and had dinner and some wine and just had the greatest time. But he's a really elegant, classy, like beautiful guy. Really special guy.
Sean, we only have elegant, classy guys on the show. So
John Terry, I met so many of them football stars now. Who was it? Who's the Liverpool? They call him God. Fowler.
Robbie Fowler.
I met him. Kenny Dalglish, who's like one of my dad's heroes.
They all play football and then they go play golf.
Yeah, John Terry, he was a lovely guy. And then one of my all-time favorites was Harry Kane. Man, he's really cool guy, lovely guy.
Sean, you are a hero to both of us, but also to a lot of these kids who I think are realizing how cool it is, the world you work in and what you add to it, both physically, scientifically, but also clearly mentally too.
Yeah, the world you create, there's nothing outside of you. It's just you are Steven Spielberg and you're producing movies every day.
There we go, guys. Everyone listening, you are Steven Spielberg. Life according to Sean Foley. It's tradition on the show that we also try and organize a future date with our guests. So we're going to suggest that next time you come over for the British Open next summer.
You don't play.
You don't have to play with me at Royal St. George's, but I can take you for a drink in the bar. How about
that?
We can.
Well, we can. if we're ever able to do that again, then we'll definitely do that.
We'll be doing it. I got Justin to sign up for a practice round with me before, so I reckon having a drink with you is like an obvious next step.
Yeah, that. You don't have to push me. I'm Canadian, bud. That's the birthright.
Sean, thank you so much. Intention, attention. I love that, and I'll remember that. And have a lovely evening. See you soon.
Okay, guys, be good.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Sending
Peace.
you back to the ether.
Bye-bye.